We're going to be discussing Trump, Putin, biscuits and maths. An unholy fusion of maths and Trump and biscuits. So who's popping there saying Russia's in a lot of economic trouble, be surprised if they're able to wage their invasion this time next year. So yeah, there are a lot of people saying the economy, you know, it's a race against time for Putin before the Russian economy collapses. All I'm going to say on that is I don't lean into that too much. I'm not saying I disagree, but it's been an issue for a while, and you can understand how people are skeptical about it now because they're saying, well, you know, we're supposed to have been told that Russia's economies have been in trouble for ages, and yet they still keep pursuing it. And also, and this comes to the crux I want to talk about today, Putin shows no sign of even wanting to negotiate peace. Doesn't even want to. So, something emerged in the news this weekend. It's on the front pages of a couple of newspapers today, but it emerged in the news this weekend, which some of you will know about, a change of policy from Trump regarding Ukraine, Russia, which is not a helpful one. But I want to come at this from another side, because it'd be easy to look at the policy that Trump has in terms of long-range strikes in Russia, and it would be easy to start from that point and then explain why it's a really bad policy. But I want to do it the other way around, right? Trump wants a certain behaviour from Putin, right? And it's not the behaviour Putin is currently exhibiting. So Trump wants someone, in this case Vladimir Putin, to change his behaviour. Now, this is really simple from a mathematical point of view, because all behaviours, everything, comes down to a very, very simple equation, and it is this. Let's put it up. Risk plus reward equals behaviour, and this applies to everything, literally everything. In everyone's, whenever anyone, and you've carried out internally these calculations multiple times today, because all of us have carried out behaviours. We got out of bed, at a certain time. I got out of bed much later than I normally would, right? There was, you know, and I made a decision. I thought about getting up at 7 o'clock. I got up at 9 o'clock, right? So there's various risk-reward behaviours. So let's look at this in terms of biscuits. Are you going to eat a biscuit or are you not going to eat a biscuit? So how does this work for biscuits? The risks, weight gain, heart disease, diabetes, cost you money, right? The reward, tastes nice. Now, if in your mind the risk is greater than the reward, you don't eat the biscuit. If the reward is greater than your perceived risk, doesn't matter whether the risk or the reward is real or not, doesn't matter, it's your perception. If you think the reward is greater than the risk, you eat the biscuit. So let's compare a couple of types of people that are completely different with their attitude to biscuits, but both of them will choose not to eat the biscuit. So I've known a couple of people in my life who are like supremely fit and healthy, like live incredibly fit and healthy lifestyles, right? They don't eat biscuits. Okay, I've known other people who live very fit and healthy lifestyles who will eat the odd biscuit, but I've known some who will just they'd never eat biscuits, right? So in their mind, right, look at the risk, weight gain. They're not, I mean, like a biscuit every few months isn't going to put on weight, right? Heart disease, diabetes, the money, like if it's a biscuit literally every now and if you buy a packet of biscuits and you put them in the biscuit barrel and then maybe every few days you have a biscuit with a cup of tea, none of those risks are serious to you, right? So why are there people who will never eat biscuits? Because the risk is tiny. Because for them, the reward isn't good enough. It doesn't taste nice enough. It's like they say, I can't remember who said it. Someone said it, didn't they? Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. So for some people, right, that reward, even though the risk is really, really small, the reward is even smaller, so they don't eat the biscuit. But then you have people on the other end of the scale. You have people for whom the taste, they love biscuits. Biscuits are good. Oh, chocolate hobnobs. No, they're too nice. So the reward is actually really large. Chocolate hobnobs are like, they're like heroin, really. They should be banned. So what about the risk? Well, if you're the sort of person who's not going to have a chocolate hobnob every now and then, but there's a risk that you actually eat the whole packet of biscuits in one go, then weight gain is a serious risk, right? If you do this on a regular basis, if you don't buy a packet of biscuits every month and it takes you a whole month to eat the whole packet. If you actually put in your weekly shopping like 6 packets of biscuits and they'll be gone the end of the week, then yeah, weight gain, heart disease, diabetes, and the cost of it, the financial cost of it, they're all serious risks. So you may choose not to buy the biscuits in the first place because you can't trust yourself just to have one biscuit every few days, right? So two situations where someone doesn't eat the biscuit, but very different, but it is still based on that risk-reward calculation. So someone just said shortbread is Biscuit King. Shortbread is also very nice. Although my wife complains it's not as nice as when she was a kid. Something to do with the salt. Anyway, doesn't matter. How does this therefore apply to Trump and Putin? Because Trump wants a certain behaviour from Putin. So let's look at the behaviours first of all, before we look at the risk and reward. So, at the moment, the behaviour is Putin is continuing his invasion. So in his mind, the reward is greater than the risk of invading. So when you look at continuing the invasion, what are the risks and rewards? His internal calculation is the reward is greater, or the potential reward is greater. Trump wants him to move down. So what are some other behaviours he could exhibit? He could agree to a ceasefire. He could agree to a peace deal, which is what Trump wants. He could agree to withdraw from Ukraine altogether, which is what the rest of us want, right? But at the moment, he's continuing his invasion. So, in order to change that calculation in Putin's head, you have to raise the risk or reduce the reward. Because otherwise the behaviour, if the risk-reward calculation remains the same as it is now in Putin's head, he continues with his behaviour. If you want to change his behaviour, you have to change the risk-reward balance. So Trump, what options does he have? Now, this isn't exhaustive. You may come up with other ones, but let me go down what I came up with. Sanctions. So there are sanctions in place, but again, at the equilibrium point at the moment is the invasion continues. So if Trump wants Putin to move down that behaviour ladder, he could increase sanctions, but he's ruled it out, at least for now. We have put weakened there. That means weakened military. So Russia's military is being weakened by the war. But again, the current rate of weakening, Putin is happy with. So you'd have to increase it. That would mean increasing Ukraine's capacity. Well, it would mean one of two things. Either NATO just goes into Ukraine and says, we're sick of this, we've had enough of it, we're going to repel, we're going to support Ukraine in battle directly against Russia. You're going to have an actual NATO-Russia war, and we're going to repel. So you could do that, but no one wants to do that, right? So your alternative is you empower Ukraine to further weaken Russia's military, right? That's another option. Then there's the economy. So, for example, and this comes into the first two, but Ukraine strikes against oil refineries, for example, that provides a hit to the economy, right? That provides a material hit to the economy. There's the potential for civil unrest. Well, actually, hitting the oil refineries means petrol shortages, price of petrol goes up. That could contribute to civil unrest. Then there's the oligarchs. Putin may be this strongman leader, but he's not really a dictator. He's a pirate king, right? Pirate captains in the days of privateers were elected by their crew. They weren't captain because they owned the ship. They were elected by their crew because they were the best ones to lead them to more plunder, or so the pirates thought. Putin's a pirate king, right? His oligarchs think he's the best person to lead them to riches. If you can put pressure on the oligarchs, if you can get them to think that Putin's actions are actually hurting them, they'll get rid of him, right? So these are all the ways, and some of these are easier to accomplish than others. For Trump, the easiest ones to directly manage are sanctions and weakening Russia's military, right? Then there's the reward. So you could raise the risk or you could reduce the reward. So what are the rewards that Putin thinks he's getting out of invading Ukraine? More resources, right? Russia doesn't make anything anyone wants. It has a manufacturing sector, doesn't really produce anything that's much good other than military stuff, which it uses itself, right? No Western country, none of the countries with a lot of money are going to buy a lot of Russian tech. Some, but not a lot. Beyond that, manufacturing is not really good in Russia. Its economy is based on digging things out the ground, so natural resources. So if you capture more land, you capture more natural resources, which is how their whole economy is based. Their entire economic thinking is based on digging things out the ground and selling it, right? So obviously that's a big reward. Geopolitical power, the more people and the more territory you control, the more power you have on the world stage. Feeling of security. It's absolutely insane, but people in Russia do actually fear NATO. They think, and it's mad, and I don't know really why, because like I've just said, NATO could choose. NATO is much stronger than the Russian military. I mean, the Russian military at the moment is only matching Ukraine. So NATO against Russian military, easy win, but they won't do it. So if NATO will not even repel a Russian invasion, why the hell would NATO want to invade Russia? NATO has an excuse. If all NATO needed was an excuse to invade Russia, it's got it. It could easily go into Ukraine at Ukraine's invitation, repel Russian forces from Ukraine, and then carry out a counter-invasion against Russia and demilitarize 200 miles on the east side of the Russian-Ukraine border, right? But they're not doing it. They're not even repelling Russia. So it is a bit mad. But nonetheless, perception, right? Russia, a lot of Russians believe that NATO is a threat to them. So if Russia can control a load of countries between Russia and most of Europe, they create a buffer zone against NATO, right? The economy. If your economy is based on digging things out the ground, then, and that's your entire mindset, instead of making things people want, right? If your entire mindset is no, because that would mean educating the public, and we don't want to do that. We don't want high skills. We just want to dig things out. We just want miners. That's all they want. They want miners. They want people to dig things out the ground and sell it. So you need more land. So the payoff, if they can capture all this territory, is, in the long term, a stronger economy. And then trade. Well, they know that if they can capture territory and make it stick, the world will eventually have to accept it. Because there comes a point where that is the new norm now. Once you've had, like you can look at Israel, for example, 100 years ago, I would have said that you should never displace a load of people in Palestine to make room for this Israeli state. But it's stuck now. You've now got the Israeli state is well established. People have been born there, grown up there, grown old there. It's there. So the two-state solution is the one you back now. The same applies here. The same would apply here. Once a country has had control of territory for like multiple generations and it's stable, if it's stable, then it's accepted. I mean, the USSR was accepted. The thing that caused the USSR to collapse wasn't really anything external. It was internal. It was the people who basically revolted, is ultimately what ended it. Same thing here. So Putin knows if he can make it stick, then eventually the trade sanctions will go away. And if he can make it stick, he's got more stuff to trade with and the trade will improve. So those are all his rewards. Those are his rewards, right? So now let's look at the Daily Telegraph. So you may have seen this news anyway, but the Daily Telegraph front page really set it out, right? So this is their headline. Trump cuts off Kyiv's long-range missile. So what Trump has now said is Ukraine is not allowed to attack targets deep within Russia. They're allowed to still attack targets like other side of the border, strictly things that are being used to launch direct attacks on Ukraine, but not deeper in, right? And then underneath it, the byline says, US hopes ban on strikes deep inside Russia will entice Putin to peace talks. This is like the dumbest thing. Someone needs to arrange a meeting. I will explain this to Trump, how dumb this is. But let's go through it. Let's apply some maths. So Trump has said to Ukraine, you're not allowed to carry out missile attacks on targets deep inside Russia. And Trump thinks that will incentivize Putin to move down that behavior ladder, right? But let's go through it. How does stopping Ukraine attacking targets deep inside Russia, which can include oil refineries, change this calculation. Right, go down the list. Sanctions. Doesn't really do anything with sanctions. Weakened military. Well, actually, this helps reduce that risk because Ukraine is not allowed to attack even military targets deep inside Russia now. So that is actually helping to protect parts of the Russian military. So that's actually reducing the risk. The economy, attacking like oil refineries and similar infrastructure is actually a hit to the internal Russian economy. So protecting them, Trump is protecting them, he's actually reducing the risk of economic damage for Putin. Civil unrest, things like shortages of petrol is a source of civil unrest. So he's dialing that down. Same with the oligarchs, right? Trump has basically protected some of the Russians' oligarchs as long as they're deep within Russia. So actually what Trump has done with this policy is reduced the risk for Putin. So then you look at the rewards. Is he at least reducing Putin's perceived rewards? The resources? No. Geopolitical power? No. None of these things. Feeling of security. You've actually given him an enhanced feeling of security. Putin now feels more secure as a result of this policy. So the risk-reward calculation was already for Putin in favour of continuing the invasion. Trump with this behaviour, and this is why this should get me to meet. I won't even call him the origin one. I'll be really polite to him. Give me half an hour with him and I'll try and explain it to him in simple maths. If you want to change the behaviour, you must change the risk-reward calculation. And if you want to change Putin's behaviour away from invading, you have to either increase the risk of invading or reduce the potential reward of invading. This move by Trump, it doesn't matter. You don't have to quantify it even. We do not even have to say that it increases the risk by X amount or reduces the reward by X amount. It doesn't matter. We know that the equilibrium right now of this calculation, or was it 2 weeks ago, was in favour of continuing the invasion. Putin was showing no signs of wanting to come to the peace table. Trump, with his behaviour, including this, but over the last 2 weeks, has actively reduced the risk for Putin. He's reduced the risk of sanctions. He's reduced the risk of damage to his military. He's reduced the risk to his economy. He's reduced the risk of civil unrest. And he's increased the feeling of security. So Trump has materially shifted that risk-reward calculation further towards encouraging him to continue the invasion. And this is the opposite of what Trump wants to do, which is why I could say this is the dumbest thing he's done. Because this isn't Agent Krasnov stuff. This isn't Trump doing, well, he is doing what Putin wants him to do. But Trump wants Putin to come to the negotiations. But this is doing the opposite. The man's an idiot. But also the people around him, the people who are advising him, are also idiots if they can't see this. The problem with the reward section, Ukraine won't and shouldn't be expected to give up land. The US doesn't trade much with Russia and most of Europe weaned off Russia. No, but that's not a problem. That's not a problem with it at all, because as far as Putin's concerned, right, he can win that. You are right. Ukraine shouldn't be expected to give up land, and it won't, by the way. Even if there's a peace deal, Europe will not countenance them permanently. They may have to agree that they may have to accept formally that Russia controls some of their territory, but there's no international lines being redrawn. But nonetheless, that doesn't change this at all, because a risk-reward calculation is internal. It's perception. It's in Putin's head. In Putin's head, if he fully invades Ukraine, or the bits of it he wants, he might not care about some of the western bits, but he wants eastern and central Ukraine. He wants way more. Like if I get rid of these and put up the contested bit, he wants way more than those pink zones, right? He wants to go right across past Kharkiv, certainly. He may not care about getting quite to Kiev, but he wants a good chunk of Ukraine. He wants eastern and central parts of Ukraine. In his head, if he captures those, where was it? Get rid of the biscuit. Where are the biscuits going? There we go. If he captures those and he holds them for, say, 30 years, or Russia holds them for 30 years, as far as he's concerned, the world will have to accept that, because it happened with the USSR, right? And I know with the case of USSR, that was Western powers and Russia carved up Europe, right? So there was like agreement, but he knows that. He knows that. I mean, for example, why did we, after, like, even after the full-scale after the initial invasion of Ukraine in 2014, why did we not take action then? Why did we allow them to host the World Cup? Why? Why did we let them host the World Cup? Why didn't we shut off, why didn't we apply these sanctions then? Because the West was more interested in protecting its trade than it was in protecting what it saw at the time as a small part of Europe. It's only the full-scale invasion where Europe saw the danger to itself. I mean, Europe's support of Ukraine, I mean, there are those of us in Europe who support Ukraine for the right reasons, but let us be clear, the political support for Ukraine is entirely self-centered. It's entirely selfish, you know, and Putin knows that as well. Phil's assuming the orange one's executive functioning actually works. No, I know it doesn't work. That's why I say I need to meet with him. They should arrange a meeting with me so I can explain it. It's because his executive doesn't work that I say that. Otherwise, I'd be saying, Trump, right, he's the US president. He's got access to the best experts in the world. He can get an expert on anything. Anything at all. He could get an expert. He could get on the blower and he could say, I want an expert on bone spurs here this afternoon. And he can get the world's foremost expert on bone spurs in his office that very afternoon, right? He's got the power to have whatever experts he wants. But he doesn't. He doesn't have experts. He shuns experts. He wants yes men, right? So no one around him has the wit or the confidence to explain this very, very, very simple calculation. Vince, they're saying threats of nuclear destruction. There is no threat of nuclear destruction. No expert thinks there is. And it's not just that we don't even know that Russia has the physical capability. Because think about it this way, and I keep saying this, no, he doesn't believe experts, Vince. That's exactly the problem. The thing about the risk of nuclear war is, first of all, Putin is not mad. There are some people in the world who are mad. Like, that's why there's a lot of people who they worry more about Iran getting nuclear weapons than Russia having them, because they worry that Iran's leadership is actually mad, but they don't think Russia's leadership is mad, right? Mutually assured destruction, not something Putin wants, right? You know, so, so there's the first thing, which is, does Russia even have the capacity to launch a serious missile strike? It's all right assuming it does, but we don't know that. For example, we know that Putin pumped a lot of money into modernise the Russian military, specifically for invading Ukraine and other, like, you know, he wants to, his appetite isn't satisfied with Ukraine. He wants Baltic states, he wants Finland, right? He wants to invade more. He wants to invade every single country that has a border on the western end of Russia. He wants literally, he doesn't want to border any country that's Western aligned. So any country that is so he was sort of probably, he was okay with Ukraine whilst it was in the, even outside of Russia's influence, whilst it was sort of within the Russian sphere of influence, if we say. It's when it started westernizing that's what triggered the invasion. So what he wants is, he doesn't want any Western aligned country bordering Russia. And he will invade them rather than allow that to happen. I mean, like, perish the thought that he might actually just, you know, forge good relationships with those. No, domination is all he knows, right? Domination. If he can't dominate them culturally, he'll dominate them militarily. So that's what he wants. And he wanted to build up a powerful military to achieve it. And he gave money to the military to modernise. And then all the people in charge of the money spent it on mansions and super yachts instead, because they thought, well, our military's all right, we don't really need it modernising, I'll have that money instead. So if his oligarchs siphoned off money that was earmarked for the military, when Russia does actually wage conventional warfare, Do we really believe that any money that's been allocated to maintaining their nuclear capabilities was spent on the nuclear capabilities? I'm not so sure. But even if it was, he won't launch a strike. Because if he wipes out a Western city, then Moscow and St. Petersburg are up in smoke. Like, there's no question about that. So he won't. This threat, and I do accept, because people say that Trump seems to be genuinely afraid of the nuclear threat. So I accept that in Trump's head, his risk, he has a different risk reward calculation, right? In his head, his Swiss cheese head, he does fear nuclear escalation, but it's a completely unfounded fear. No serious expert thinks that. Basically, there are people, experts, who think if we did actually just engage Russia militarily, it could escalate in other ways, right? And maybe there is a genuine fear about wider escalation in terms of how, other countries around the world perceive that, right? So there can be genuine knock-on effects. But militarily, if NATO did engage Russia directly and repel them from Ukraine, militarily, that is a fight NATO wins 10 times out of 10. Higari's just saying there, I'm still failing to get through to my reform villagers. Tiring, not going to lie, yes. It's an uphill battle at the moment. Anyway, Czech and German journalists translated 20 million Russian documents on their nuclear capabilities, spent years on it. We know what Russia has, where they are, even some 3D maps of facilities. No, some of it, even Russia doesn't know what they have. After the fall of the Soviet Union, quite a lot of it went into missing. There were reports of things that went missing, which was a bit of a worry. But also, you talk about Russian documents. The Russian documents are not necessarily an accurate appraisal of what they have. What Putin thought he had in terms of conventional military equipment was not what he actually had, was it? So the documents do not necessarily tell the full picture. The documents only tell the picture that the person writing them wanted to tell. It doesn't necessarily reflect reality. The language on Russian news channels now targeting Estonia. Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I mean, see, this is where there are risks. It's not that there's no risks at the moment in Putin's calculation. One of the risks he has, but it's just that the current state of it is towards continuing the invasion. There's two big risks. One of them is Russia's military is being weakened by the war against Ukraine. Russia does not have the strength to invade Estonia at the moment because it's engaged with Ukraine. Now, if it were able to get a peace deal, and we know a peace deal for Putin is just a pause to rearm, right? That's the danger. Actually, the danger is that Putin sounds reasonable on a peace deal because and Trump is persuaded that the security guarantees aren't needed. That was always the big danger, because we know that Putin never agrees to a peace deal. You could see it with Chechnya, right? He attempted, his objectives in Chechnya weren't met, so he agreed peace. Then a bit later, he came back and bombed it flat. The peace was just the pause to rearm and do it again, have a better think about it. But, so yeah, if he were to agree, if there were to be some sort of peace deal with Ukraine, you wouldn't just want to make sure that Ukraine had security guarantees. You would want, everyone in Europe will be aware that Putin, let's say there were peace agreed next month. Trump wants it really quickly. Let's say, September, peace is agreed. October, Trump gets the Nobel Peace Prize. Whatever, don't care. Right. Because it's coming up to Nobel Prize season, isn't it? So, let us say that happens. Trump thinks to himself, that's it, that's peace. Russia's going to be at peace for the next 10, 20 years, whatever. We know it's not. Russia will invade someone else. It'll either invade Ukraine again, or it'll invade Estonia, or it'll invade whoever, right? It will invade wherever it thinks is the weakest, Moldova, the weakest target. Whoever he thinks is the weakest target, he will invade in a few years' time. So we also need, you know, to make sure that we're planning for that, that it is going to happen, and that when it happens, we may not have American support. You know, that's the European part of the European risk reward calculation. But that calculation is there, everyone. That calculation determines Ukraine's behaviour, it determines Russia's behaviour, America's behaviour, Europe's behaviour, it determines everyone's behaviour. Like Orban, Viktor Orban in Hungary, his risk reward calculation is well out of whack. He doesn't think that Hungary is in the firing line. He's like looking at Belarus and going, yeah, that won't happen to Hungary. Why won't that happen to Hungary? So, but he has a risk reward calculation. He thinks, because he's naturally sort of aligned towards Russia anyway, he thinks there's great rewards there with aligning with Russia and being a good little poodle for Putin. He thinks that gives him great rewards. And so he downplays the risk and maybe upplays the reward. Or maybe he doesn't upplay the reward. Maybe the rewards are real for him. But he certainly downplays the risk. If Putin uses nukes, he'll never be able to leave his bunker again. There'll be no point in him doing so. Like, Putin actually is driven by nationalism, remember. He's very much like Hitler in multiple ways. But remember, Hitler was not a greedy man. He was driven by a genuine sense of what he saw as patriotism. You know, he was ideological. It was very dangerous. Ideological people, or people, I mean, everyone, I mean, I'm ideological, but, you know, people who prioritise their ideology over pragmatism are incredibly dangerous people to deal with. And Putin is like that. So he won't risk the destruction of Moscow. He knows, you know, people, no one's going to invade Moscow. It's really hard. It's really difficult. And modern technology doesn't help you invade Moscow. The terrain is really difficult. It's incredibly well defended. You know, just naturally the geology just helps it. But now you've got the added problem. No one even wants to invade Moscow. Moscow's a shithole. No one wants Moscow. But nonetheless, Putin, you know, has this view, and he wants to build up Russia's strength. He feels that, you know, not unreasonable. I mean, because the thing is, although he's convincing people, he's convinced Trump that Russia's this superpower. Russia's not a superpower. Russia hasn't been a superpower for a very long time. It's weak. Russia could not even, like, if you had a country, imagine a country that was on economically and militarily the same level as Italy, but bordering Russia. If Russia tried to invade that country, it would fail hard. You know, it's weak. It cannot even take on Ukraine. Ukraine's one country. It's a big country by European standards, but it's not big by Russian standards. Russia couldn't even invade. And remember, Russia wasn't trying to invade it carefully. Russia didn't care if it bombed the whole place flat. Russia just wanted the land. If all the people, yeah, okay, Russia would also like the people to be serfs as well. It wants to capture the people. But it's not that bothered. If Russia has to destroy everyone in Ukraine and bomb every building in Ukraine, it will happily do so. And yet it still can't take Ukraine. Russia's weak, and Putin knows that. So that helps drive that fear, that feeling, that security thing, that need for security, because that only makes it worse in many ways. But anyway, Russia in general is a disappointment, has so much potential as a country, is instead such a malign influence on the world. Yeah, hugely malign. It goes beyond just invading bits of Eastern Europe. We know it's driving, I mean, it's doing this deliberately to destabilise Europe. It wants to destabilise Europe by driving refugee crises in Africa. You know, so it's like literally the most malign country in the world. Sorry. You know, if you could get Russia to wake up one day and decide to be a force for, doesn't even have to be a force for good, just be neutral. If Russia were just neutral, it says, do you know what? We're just going to, if it just thought to itself, no one wants to invade us because we're a shithole, right? We'll just sort ourselves out, we'll dig things out of the ground and sell it to people, and we won't bother anyone. The world overnight would become a much better place. Overnight. We'd still have some problems. There are still dickheads around the world. But all of a sudden, lots and lots of problems around the world would go away. And that would actually allow the rest of the world to then concentrate on the smaller number of problems. The domino effect would be immense. If Russia would just wake up and decide, you know what, should we be the good guys? You know, it wouldn't even have to help. It would just have to stop hindering. And it would just make such a difference. But there it is anyway. It is really simple. Someone just needs to explain basic maths to Trump. It's so simple, you could even do it with a Sharpie. That easy. Pack of crayons, piece of paper, it's all you need. I could explain it to him in half an hour. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of Monday. And until next time, I'll see you later.